What do the terms liberty and freedom really mean? Find out on this edition of Hot Take! So the terms liberty and freedom get thrown around a lot in this country, especially on the right. Heck, they're even in the name of my channel and the blog that I write for, which, by the way, are at the Liberty Ambassador and at the Liberty Cadre, respectively. So considering that I do indeed call myself the Liberty Ambassador, I thought it might be a good idea to actually do a video talking about what liberty and a similar term, freedom, actually means. Now, the terms freedom and liberty, particularly liberty, have a very long history going all the way back to Aristotle and carried forth by philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Stuart Mill, and numerous others. So I'm not going to attempt to recreate the entire discourse on the term liberty here, but I am going to focus kind of on the core definition and a practical definition of the terms liberty and freedom today. So we're going to start by just looking at the basic dictionary definition of the terms as provided by the great arbiter of truth known as Merriam-Webster. So the Merriam-Webster definition of liberty, and I'm just going to read kind of the first portion of it here because the others aren't really relevant for the political and philosophical discussion, is the quality or state of being free, the power to do as one pleases, freedom from physical restraint, freedom from arbitrary or despotic control, the positive enjoyment of various social, political, or economic rights and privileges, power of choice. And the definition of freedom is the quality of state of being free, such as the absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in choice or action, liberation from slavery or restraint from the power of another, the quality or state of being exempt or released, usually from something onerous, unrestricted use, ease, facility, the quality of being frank, open, or outspoken, improper familiarity, boldness of conception or execution. Now, from a linguistic perspective, and just looking at it in terms of how people actually use these terms in conversation, there's nothing wrong with any portion of either of these definitions. But if we look at it from a political and philosophical point of view, only certain parts of them are actually relevant. And even then, there's some parts of the definitions that, while they have been used in political and philosophical contexts, aren't really practical. They don't really work. You could break this down as kind of the distinction between positive liberty and negative liberty. Now, so far as I can tell, where these concepts of positive liberty and negative liberty were first popularized were in a speech, or excuse me, a lecture given by Isaiah Berlin in 1958 called The Two Concepts of Liberty. It was later made into a pamphlet. So going back to the Merriam-Webster definition for a minute, the positive liberty term refers mainly to the portion of the definition that says liberty is the power to do as one pleases, whereas the negative liberty term refers to the part of the definition which is freedom from arbitrary or despotic control, or the positive enjoyment of various social, political, or economic rights and privileges. Now, the positive liberty definition actually kind of builds on a sense of liberty that was established by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was basically of the belief that in a state of nature, human beings were perfectly free, but the introduction of civil society and property rights and things of that sort have basically taken our freedom away. And a lot of Marxists have kind of, to the extent that they actually believe in liberty and freedom, have used kind of the positive rights definition of it in the sense that true freedom is not simply being free from governments or other sources putting artificial constraints on you, but even just being able to do whatever you wish and having the means to do that, and there not being consequences as a result of those actions, or at least not negative consequences. Now, the problem is that positive liberty, as it's so called, is not really actual liberty, or at least not in the sense that positive liberty is actually achievable. Because in its truest sense, positive liberty is actually impossible, because there's always going to be some degree of constraints on your actions just by the virtues of the universe that we've been created in. For example, if your ideal self-actualization was to be able to live without eating, That's simply not physically possible. If your body doesn't get food, you die after a certain point. So that already has natural limits on it. Now, to people who advocate the view of positive liberty, Western society is increasingly a violator of liberty. Not for things that someone like myself might think of as a violation of liberty, like banning guns or putting restrictions on speech or things of that nature, but things just like capitalism, for instance. Like, if someone has a job that they don't like and they want to leave, supposedly, but it would cause them financial hardship to leave to the extent where they might not be able to pay their bills for a while or might not be able to pay their bills the next month, then a positive liberty advocate will consider such a situation a violation of liberty. Now, the problem with the positive liberty argument is that it assumes that it's only human-created structures, governments, economic systems, corporations, those sorts of things, that place these constraints upon people. And that if you just went back to a pure state of nature, people would be able to self-actualize. This is kind of the argument that Jean-Jacques Rousseau made. However, that's simply not the case. Because if you think about an individual from the pure state of nature, no sorts of societal institutions or anything like that, no cultural norms, just you on your own in the wilderness trying to provide for yourself, you actually still have a lot of constraints on your time and behavior. Because that means you've got to go through the full process of finding, gathering, and making edible food for yourself. And that takes up quite a bit of time. We're just talking about food. We haven't even gotten to things like water, or shelter, or clothing, or anything else that is considered a necessity. So, yeah, if your self-actualization was being a hunter-gatherer, then yeah, you could probably do that and maybe a couple of other things. But without help, you simply just wouldn't have time for anything else. So even in the state of nature, in order to actually be able to truly be free to do whatever you want to do, you have to seek out the help of other people just so that you can divide labor in such a way that you actually have time to do things other than just provide food and shelter for yourself. Now, the complication is, as soon as you start interacting with other people on really anything larger than just a one-to-one basis, as soon as you interact with people on any degree of scale, you're going to start having these so-called social constructs forming. Things like cultural norms, economic systems, governments, all sorts of groups of people that have certain rules about things. That's a natural consequence of interacting with other human beings. And from this Rousseauian sort of view, which is what eventually evolved into the philosophy of positive liberty, as soon as you have these sorts of so-called social constructs, your positive liberty has already been violated, because it's basically impossible for there not to be some sort of rule or norm or social pressure that doesn't in some way cause at least a little bit of tension with somebody's desire of what they want to be. So even from a basic theoretical level, the concept of positive liberty just falls apart. But even if you wanted to try to make the argument, well, okay, it's not possible in a basic state of nature, but once you have a certain degree of technological advancement and societal structures and those sorts of things, that you can get to a point when you have kind of all that already established that you can cast away a lot of those things and allow people to get resources in such a way where they can do whatever they want to do. Well, that isn't really true either. Because even disregarding the always constant limitation on human behavior that is the laws of physics, there's certain other realities that there's no reason to believe are ever going to go away. For example, the concept of scarcity of resources. There's no economic system that we have yet devised or any state of existing that eliminates that principle. Now, in capitalist societies, there is so much wealth that is generated overall that people may be deceived into believing scarcity is no longer a thing, but it very much is. That's why when people try to initiate communist and socialist systems, they find out very quickly that scarcity is real, and when you try to force resources to be distributed equally, you just end up with everybody having a lack of resources, except for maybe the people at the very, very top who are actually in charge of distributing all of this stuff, which is ironically the very thing that communism and socialism are designed to avoid, supposedly. And basically what a positive liberty advocate will try to say today is, well, but we can just take resources from those at the top and they'll still be free to do more or less what they want to do, and we can give those resources to the people at the bottom, and that will then give them more positive liberty, the more ability to be what they want to be. Well, the problem with that is it's still a violation of liberty if you do that. It's still a violation of even positive liberty. Because let's say someone wants to be the richest human being in the world. Let's say that they want to have $10 trillion. If you then take money from them that prevents them from getting $10 trillion and you give that to somebody else, you have thus negatively impacted the person who wanted to have $10 trillion as self-actualization. So it's impossible to design a system that tries to redistribute resources in such a way that everybody's self-actualization is fully realized. Because just people's ideas of what they want to be necessarily conflict with each other in a lot of ways. So really, the only concept of liberty that is actually achievable, even from a theoretical perspective, is the so-called negative liberty. Now, what negative liberty looks like is simply being able to do whatever you are willing and capable of doing on your own, or what you can get other people to consent to help you with, without other people using force or coercion to stop you, or the government using force or coercion to stop you. For example, if you wanted to go buy something from the supermarket, as long as the people who own and operate that supermarket are willing to sell you those items, then no one is allowed to either go take something from the supermarket without their consent or physically attack you to prevent you from getting to the supermarket. That's what negative liberty looks like. So the so-called negative liberty is the theory of liberty that was held by people like Jean-Jacques and the Founding Fathers. However, negative liberty does not put an obligation on anybody else to provide you the means to do what you wish to do. It's only permissive of what you are capable of doing on your own, or what you are willing or able to convince others to help you with. So, for example, if you didn't have a car, but you wanted to go to the supermarket, and you went up to someone and asked them, hey, can I borrow your car to go to the supermarket? And they allowed you to use their car for that purpose. That is A-okay. That's a consensual exchange. However, if you went up to someone with a gun and you shot them and you took their car, that would not be an example of negative liberty, because you have thus violated their ability to do what they were willing and able to do by killing them. So I don't think it's any secret, based on how I've argued in this video, that I'm very much a negative liberty advocate. And that's mainly just because one of these concepts of liberty is actually feasible and the other one is not. As I've explained with the case of positive liberty, as soon as you have people interacting with each other, that simply falls apart and becomes basically impossible. In the case of negative liberty, at least at the theoretical level, it pretty much works, because all that is required is people not to act on their sinful desires to violate the natural rights of others. Now, in practice, because we live in a world where sin is a thing, any sort of implementation of protecting negative liberty is going to be imperfect as well. But at least it is actually achievable to some degree. It doesn't go out the window as soon as you actually look at the laws of physics like positive liberty does. I feel like now is a good time to point out that freedom and liberty are not always used interchangeably in political and philosophical discussion, even though I have been using them interchangeably for the most part in this video. So the distinction between freedom and liberty is more so in what the end is rather than the means. And for freedom, the end is really just whatever makes you feel good or whatever makes you happy at a particular moment. So if you want to shoot your AR-15 up into the air while banging 3 prostitutes in your marijuana patch after having just come from a gay wedding, if that's what makes you happy and you're not violating any other person's rights and you're still subject to kind of the natural consequences of reality, then that is a-okay. That is the kind of whole idea behind freedom. Liberty, on the other hand, is a little bit different. Even though, in effect, it may allow all of the things that I just mentioned, there's a greater purpose behind it. The idea behind liberty is that you're given the freedom to do anything because that will enable you to do what you ought to do the right things. For example, the reason why we have the freedom of speech from a liberty perspective is not so that people will go out and tell people that they're a piece of crap or insult them or things along that, even though that might be allowed. The idea behind the freedom of speech is that people, therefore, since they are able to say anything, will then have the capability to say things that need to be said that people may not want to hear, but are morally right to say. And basically the idea of liberty is that you give people great latitude because that's the best method of ensuring that good things happen, whereas freedom is just you let people do what they want to do because that's what they want to do. So that pretty much sums up what I've got to say about liberty. I think we've pretty much realized from the arguments that I've made that really the so-called negative liberty is the only one that's actually usable and is practical, because positive liberty, as we've seen, taken to its logical conclusion, actually contradicts itself. So it's very important that people understand the meaning of liberty and apply it correctly. Now, there actually is one subset of liberty and freedom that I didn't quite get to, and that is liberty and freedom from a Christian perspective, because the Bible surprisingly actually talks about freedom quite a lot, but not quite in the same way necessarily that we would naturally think of when we think of freedom. So, what is the Christian perspective on freedom and how can we apply it? For that, you will have to tune in to the first episode of a new show I'm working on called Sunday School, because that is going to be my first topic, freedom from a Christian perspective. I plan to have that ready for your viewing pleasure within the next 2 weeks or so I hope you'll look forward to it. Thanks for watching. So I gave you guys my take. I'd like to know yours. Let me know down in the comments section if you enjoyed this video. Be sure to hit that like button and share it with your friends.
And subscribe.
Do you want to edit this video? Is that what you want? Do you want to edit this video?
Nah, I'm good.
Okay then! Seriously though, I really would appreciate it if you'd hit that subscribe button. Oh, and hit the little bell to get notifications when I upload new videos, since subscriptions don't mean that much anymore. I'll see you next time.